Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world today. We have a great topic lined up today for our 48th edition of our craft building series that our Grey Swan Guild does. So I'm hoping towards the end, we'll have a lot of interaction amongst the people that are joining us. It's on three forces. These are the equivalents of the hurricanes, volcanoes, and tornadoes of what makes the world go around. They're on influence, persuasion, and advocacy. I'm joined by my co-host today, Sarah, who I'll introduce a little bit more formally. And she's actually done the instructions that I should have followed myself by having my background, but she's got the preferred host background. So welcome into the fold today, Sarah.
Pleasure to be here.
I must say, by way of passing, today's Indigenous Day in Canada, so I will be wearing my orange shirt later, which is the color of the day. I just needed to get that out for some of my Indigenous friends and a really noble cause for reconciling on some of our pasts, which weren't always glorious, but hopefully really good foot forward in the future. So with that, let's get into this topic. We've got an hour together today. Super excited. Sarah is so precociously talented and qualified on the subject that I just want to geek out on the subject. Like we do in all these events, we try to get behind the scenes and actually go beyond the what is happening and more about how do we go about doing this stuff? What are some of the concepts? How do we create, in this case, influence, and what does it actually mean? So we'll talk about that today. My name's Sean Moffat. I'm founder of the Grey Swan Guild. I run this thing called Future Proofing in either my spare time or my full time. I'm not too sure which anymore. And I'm also an executive principal for Cena Sprints. Sarah Marilyn Barrick, who is joining us from parts unknown Carolina. You'll tell me. I think it's Raleigh. You'll tell me if okay, I got it right. You're founder of Snap Hustle. You're a go-to-market strategist. You're also an executive principal with Cena Sprints. And so we've been doing some work together there. What should we know about you?
Well, I do lots of viral marketing and working with influencers and stuff like that. I've been doing that for a long time. So very, very good topic for me today. Very excited to talk about this. One thing people may know that may be relevant is I was senior advisor and ran the digital campaign for Marianne Williamson's 2020 presidential run, which we got viral influence, viral fundraising. We got her onto the debate stage. We just got a lot of really great outcomes and shifted the discourse of the presidential election season. So when it comes to influence, that's a really great case example that I hope we'll get to touch on a little bit today, but lots of experience working with people who attain influence. And these days I consult with companies with Cygnus and on my own for how do you keep a brand culture existing? How do you, change it into something healthy? And how do you have the internal and external experience resonate with people? So on a few dimensions, really excited to talk about this today.
And I've put what is at least a screen grab from your I guess I don't know if it's a regular hustle or your side hustle. I think it's a regular hustle now, called Snap Hustle. So you're interested in bringing influencers into building user-generated content for brands. I'm guessing parties. I'm guessing institutions. Is everybody your client pretty much?
Yeah, we built it for small and local businesses, but nothing stops enterprises from using it. But the central thesis, I guess, is that regular people are influencers. It's not just who has a big social media audience, it's who actually drives conversion for brands and products. So oftentimes those are the actual users and customers, and it's their people in their direct network that are the highest conversion possibilities. So that's sort of the key insight. A little bit different than most influencer marketing solutions. It's a little bit more of a regular person view.
Well, I love it. And we're going to take a really broad view, because I understand this domain can be for personal influence. We'll get into a few of the different domains, but it ranges anywhere from, hey, how do I get that next job for myself? Or how do I build my own, burnish my own personal influence online, to, God, how is this world changing based on how influence and, different forces at play that aren't necessarily the traditional ones. So we'll hopefully cover a big range on that today. Like all of our craft building series, my hope is we brought kind of intelligent people to the table, smart, relevant topics, which I'm certain this one is, we do it in multimedia, and we hopefully make sense of the world as an outcome. We always start with good news. Are you a wrestling fan, Sarah?
Tangentially. I like Ronda
Yeah, me
Rousey.
too. Me too. I always find it theater of the absurd when I see it. Like, I think I loved it as a 12-year-old. That was my peak wrestling time. But I do want to put like some spotlight on John Cena, who's kind of started into Hollywood. I think he's migrating. He's almost taking a number. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is probably being the most successful at converting a wrestling career into Hollywood. Anyway, long story short, John Cena, an influencer, if you will, smashes a Guinness World Record of granting 650 wishes for sick children in terms of the Children Wish Foundation. And I think the next person has less than 200. So certainly John Cena, great guy, great influencer. Do you know him by name? Have you seen any of his movies, Sarah?
Yeah. Actually, John Cena has a lot of meme power, which is one of my sort of theses of influence is, influence, a lot of it is meme power. And this guy, he's got serious meme power. I don't know if you've seen those. He had
I have.
a big wave
He's
that
got like
crested at
quite
one
an
point.
animated face.
Yeah.
Well, I love it. I don't know if it has anything to do with us. I tried to find something that was tangentially related. I've got 3 quotes to open us up. You can provide some commentary on these. Like we deal with some serious business stuff and societal stuff in our guild. And I think when it relates to this topic, the key to successful leadership is influence, not authority, in the 2020s. Kind of a good line by Kenneth Blanchard. I'll go through all 3 of them. It's the old line of, would you rather be ignored or talked about? Certainly Oscar Wilde preferred to be talked about. And so, by using influencers or having influence yourself, you're able to be talked about a little bit further. And then I'll give you a sideline story. I read The Tipping Point book many years ago by Malcolm Gladwell. It was quite formative. I actually started up my first company out of corporate life based on the principles of the book. And I actually wrote Malcolm Gladwell a letter that day thinking I'd get a form letter back. And he wrote me back in about 6 hours, like 7 paragraphs of really, really good advice in terms of, played down his role as a business person and just said, look, I'm a dumb journalist and author, but if I was to do what you're trying to do, it's this. And it was really spot on. And so his law of the few is the answer is that the success of any type of social epidemic is heavily dependent on the involvement of people with a particular and rare set of social gifts. Do you agree with this, Sarah?
I think so. And I think it kind of goes to the poll that you had on LinkedIn, where, I think the results came out that mastery or finding something new was like what people think gives other people influence. And I think that jives. And I think when I saw Marianne up close and her influence, she's got a gift, a social gift of persuading. And you can break that down, but I think that is the core of it to an extent.
I love it. We're going to get into that poll result too in a minute, but yeah, for those that we are going to have a book festival later this month. This is one of my top books ever. So hopefully that's on our list. I thought wouldn't spend too much time on this, but we've got 3 different terms. They mean slightly different things. And I thought we would kind of parse out what those mean. Influence is almost what you have. Somebody described it to me once. When you have influence when you try to act on it and people either flock to you or you hear crickets, right? I think influence is this quality that you have or capacity that you have. There's a lot of different terms around social influence and opinion leadership and a whole bunch of different things, including influencer marketing, that get rolled into this. And it has a lot of different applications. When you think about the word influence, Sarah, what conjures up in your mind?
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of things you can think about, but I think stirring people to take action, I think is the crucial thing. Is the difference between listening and like someone hearing you versus being influenced by you is what they then go on to do. Do you affect what they do? Do you affect how they think? I think that's what I think of.
I love it. And obviously I've spent some of my professional time, as you have, thinking about it in terms of marketing and brands, but I think it's just as broadly applicable in terms of friends, studying it from a psychological standpoint. How do we change people inside companies through change and transformation, and a raft of other things in terms of applications. The next one's persuasion. I see persuasion more as the act of doing something, right? It's not necessarily the outcome or the effect, but the ability to be able to persuade or convince somebody and influence them into a different direction or intention or attitude or behavior. Some of us are really good at this. I was at, you know, it's a strange thing to say, but I'm not too sure if you know the Bare Naked Ladies or are a fan of the Bare Naked Ladies, but I went to the Orpheum Coliseum in Vancouver, and that group that night could have persuaded us to do anything. Like they made us do some really crazy things. Half the crowd do this, half the crowd do this. And they had us in the palm of their hand. And I think sometimes I look at great salespeople that way. I look at great storytellers that way. I look at great politicians, and there's very few of them. I'll admit my bias there. But I think there's just this incredible sense of persuasion. What do you think of when you think of persuasion, Sarah?
I think so. I think, you know, influence and persuasion are a little bit different. And, you know, persuasion, you can easily fail to persuade someone. You can try, you can use persuasion and it can just not work. But it is sort of like that active state, I think.
I agree. X gets the square. And the last one, I kind of like when you institutionalize either influence and persuasion, I kind of call that advocacy, right? I think oftentimes we look at either causes or movements as people having attached some advocacy movement. I think in 2022, oftentimes it gets termed around social justice issues and things around diversity and inclusion and a whole bunch of other things. But you know, it could be anywhere from, look, I'm promoting on behalf of mental health and I'm advocating for that cause too. I've got an ideological bent about the world and I really want to get my viewpoint away. So it's kind of institutionalizing all of this good stuff around influence. And certainly my first gig outside of corporate life was, how do I create a firm? It was called Agent Wildfire at the time, that creates word of mouth and kind of puts this almost on a treadmill. And I know that's a little bit, you know, would that be a great way of characterizing Snap Hustle, or is there more things at play there?
I think so. There's a lot into the Snap Hustle concept. I think we're engaging with concepts like voice of the customer, and you know, acknowledging that influencer marketing isn't just about paying people to say nice things about you. There's also a power of connecting with your target audience, real users and customers, getting their testimonials, their reviews, and also hearing the bad things as well, which ultimately help you develop a more compelling product and help you market better and get a better pulse on your positioning. I think a lot of times we as marketers think we can concoct our value props and positioning in a silo, but when you have that feedback loop with actual users and customers, you're unlocking like a different level of value. So I think there's a lot into that for sure. But I think the key part with like all of these influence, persuasion, and advocacy, and that good type of user generated content is, you know, what's resonating, and are, you know, listening to know what's resonating, but also being able to put your finger and pulse on something that does resonate, that you can inspire people to take action on, that you can act on to try and persuade others with, things like that.
I love it. Well, we're going to tear through it as well. And I like the fact that you've brought in the notion of, hey, they're just not a big bullhorn or a mouthpiece to your brand or your company or organization. They can actually contribute and actually co-create with you as well, which is kind of part of the rationale for looking at them. I got into this at the top of our discussion today. I know depending on who you are and who you're listening to, either live or on recorded, you may have 5 different frames on this one. You know, I'm trying to look at this from personal standpoints. How do I increase my personal influence? How do I get that great career or become that better entrepreneur, or hell, even in personal circles, how do I get along with family members? How do I date better? How do I? There's professional stuff around just how do I get my name out there in better circles? I know we're actually writing a book as a guild for some respects to get some of our messages out there. There's leading teams and tribes and communities and networks, and how does this all work in a social space? Then there's the people that we represent or the things that we represent in terms of either political parties or brands or organizations. And then I guess at its most macro level, it's like, how does this all work from a societal standpoint, right? When we see Me Too or Black Lives Matter or societal shifts and changes happen, what's actually really going on there? Do you tend to have a more affinity to one versus one of these other domains, Sarah?
I think about them all. I think I was always like politically active before I ended up getting dragged onto the Marianne campaign. And I was always doing these viral communities, viral movements, putting a pulse on a wave that's going to crest and then riding the wave. And I think you can generalize that and do that in a lot of contexts, from your personal brand to, nationwide policy initiatives. It really does run the whole gamut. So I think that, talking about this topic across all those domains is really, really relevant. And things you learn in one domain for your personal brand can help you advocate for policy and everything in between, and help you lead better teams. The more you understand your personal influence, the more you can understand how you influence your team and the people around you and your audience on social media.
No, that's that's a great way of looking at it. It's almost the metaphor is almost like technology, right? We experience technology in our personal lives, and it has to affect how we look at technology on all other streams. I almost see this topic as having the same bent that we're experiencing it both as individuals and groups and as a society. Just so you know that we've hopefully chosen the right topic here. I always love to go to Google and look for some evidence in terms of just, wow, people are really thinking about this. And so certainly influencers, crowdfunding and crowdsourcing and anything crowd and personal branding, we kind of weren't talking about that more than 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. I don't know if you've seen the crest. I mean, you've rode this crest, I guess, up. I was doing work in the space for 15 years and I felt a little bit like very lonely back in kind of, let's call it the early 2000s. And so social media came along and all of a sudden we all get interested. So any thoughts in terms of the meteoric rise of all three of these things?
Yeah, this is a hot take, but I think this is actually like the perfect place for a hot take like this. I think influencers, the rise of this influencer phenomenon, I think is just part of something new with social media. And the core of it is just realizing that regular people have influence. And we're still like talking about it in terms of influencers who are basically like paid spokespeople. Like nothing about that is new. I'm sure we're all familiar with these celebrities that used to advocate for brands and they got paid a lot of money. And that's sort of come down to, people who have much smaller brands, personal brands, are able to do that same thing for smaller companies. It's not just huge enterprises that use spokespeople now, but the whole paradigm is still really shifting. I think that's why you're seeing such a steep curve on that influencer graph. Is we're just, with social media, we're realizing that regular people have influence over their own social networks, and we're still using the term influencer, but I think eventually we're probably going to come up with a new word that more accurately describes what's happening. It's just we're in this paradigm shift, if you want to use a term like that. And I think that's why you're seeing that steep curve. Once that starts to level out, we'll probably be in like the new normal, I think.
You know what? I couldn't agree more. And you take restaurants, for example. There's no way in hell a celebrity is telling me what restaurant to go to. It's always one of my friends, a neighbor, a colleague. Having said that, I'm going to tee this up because I know this about you already. You're in love with the Kardashians. And so we are going to get into this Kardashian influencer effect too. So, yeah.
No, you're bringing up the Kardashians just for me, Sean. Thank you.
You know how it's usually pinch nose in terms of when I see any of their stuff, but admittedly they're billionaires and they've done it mainly based on being some kind of influencer, haven't they?
Yeah. Tee it up. What you got?
I got nothing yet, but we will get into categories of influencers, and I think they probably end up in one category versus what most of us are, which are either somewhat further down the pipeline as them. And certainly from a trend standpoint, this was done for marketers by HubSpot. They looked at and this was 2021 information. They looked at what is really driving kind of a current trend in marketing's attention and spend. I was surprised by this. Influencer marketing, number one. I thought this might have crested a few years ago and that we might have moved on to the metaverse or something, but you surprised by this?
Not at all. And I think you'll probably start to see it called things like creator marketing, and probably something else once we enter this new paradigm and we figured out like a more accurate term for it, but I think it's going to keep going up, honestly.
Okay. No, but I do think a lot of us, certainly a lot of us in the guild, I think I've had conversations where it's like, please God, don't, name me the worst influencer marketing campaign. Like, don't give me that person that's never used that product. I think Jennifer Aniston gets called into this one quite a bit. Like, has she used, I don't know what cosmetic product she's hacking, but I'm sure she hasn't used the product. I'm sure she has never used the product, right? So there's a level of genuineness that I hopefully expect, and hopefully this new term will come out under that basis.
I think you're right about that for sure.
I guess from a macro perspective, I can use Socrates in terms of history and his quote here, or just what the divide is. But, back in the 60s, back in the Mad Men era of advertising and kind of mass marketing, if you told a customer enough of something, whether it was true or not, they believed it, right? This is a Don Draper and just his ability to manipulate the world. And I think what's happened is 5 things. One, the world has lost any sense of time, attention, and trust, right? We're all busy. We're all online. We're all scattered. We don't trust much. And we don't have a lot of attention for, certainly advertising, if not other kind of authorities. And amidst all of that, we have a whole bunch of product choice. Like, we have this long tail of being able to buy anything in any color at any price, and a whole bunch of media clutter as well, where it's like, look, I can go online, TV, cable, Netflix, streaming, you name it. And so, the consequence of all of that is the customer is now in control. And who do people listen to? Other customers, right? I don't know if you, do you see it through the same paradigm, or is there another reason why we're all talking about influence nowadays?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it comes down to resonance, which is a lot of what marketing was before, but there's just a new level of resonance when we can see a video of our friend having a dining experience at a certain restaurant that resonates more with us than, some celebrity eating at that same restaurant, because it's closer to us, it has more bearing on our actual lives, and there's a lot more resonance behind it. And I think even with all that, all the clutter and all the content that anyone can consume in any given time period, what resonates is what people spend the most time on. Even on TikTok, you've got a split second before someone scrolls to the next video. So if that content doesn't resonate with the viewer, then people are just going to keep scrolling. And so that's why TikTok has to tailor their algorithms to figure out what is going to resonate with each individual person and try and predict that, because that's where it's all at right now. It has to immediately resonate amongst this huge sea of content.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, TikTok's a great kind of paradigm to consider this whole world, right? Like, there are 19-year-olds that treat TikTok like their search engine, like a 35-year-old would treat Google, and a 55-year-old would treat the New York Times. It's for those that like to dismiss it disparagingly, and I've done it before, right? I have no hips that can dance, and I've said that I probably wouldn't be a great performer on TikTok, but I've started to graze on TikTok now, just because there's really interesting stuff. And what I found, Sarah, is the stuff I'm seeing on TikTok now ends up on Instagram 2 months later and ends up on Facebook a year later. There is this kind of who starts this whole thing. And I think there's a whole bunch of creators that are probably on TikTok now, right?
Yeah, and I think we really need to sort of get with the times with TikTok. People think it's Gen Z, but if you've seen mom TikTok or grandparent TikTok, there's like over 60 crowd who are going viral and creating amazing content. And there's also super educational content. When I first got into TikTok, I don't know why it was showing me TikToks of cosmetic surgeries, but there's a surgeon on there who's just like detailing how these procedures happen and breaking down different people who got different type of work done. And you'll sit there on the feed scrolling for an hour, but you'll learn so much about a very specific topic. Like, if you wanted to know about how the brain works, there's like rich TikToks by doctors who are just like giving you a ton of content in a short period of time. And so like the information density is also something to be reckoned with, where it's not just kids dancing anymore. There's doctors on there, scientists who are explaining like the benefits of nuclear energy and going viral. I mean, it's a wild world we're in now. And I think if you're still thinking it's for young people and about music, things have changed in a short amount of time, I guess.
Yeah, we're having a Ted Lasso moment. I love his line that, what you got to do? You got to think like a goldfish, because goldfish has an 8-second attention span. So I think that's what TikTok is sometimes, but that's not a bad thing. That's not disparaging. It's just usually if you're not hitting in your first 5 seconds, I think people are passing your content over. So I think we've had some opening perspectives here. I'll pass through this one, but you had brought up the poll that we had earlier. So I call these things the Moffat meter polls before I know we're going to do one of these events. And we got quite a lot of traction in terms of response on this one. And people always go, I always love the people that write in stuff going, you're totally wrong. This should have more nuance to it. And I'm like, look, I know, but LinkedIn only allows me 4 choices. So please don't hold me personally accountable. But fair point. There was a couple of good write-in spaces, but I tried to land on 5-letter words that we probably don't normally use, but describe a category of influence or a source of influence. One was grasp. So have you mastered, or are you really able on something? And so because of that, you're able to impart that on other people. Scout, are you the first to know things? Knack, or do you just have this brinksmanship and ability to actually charm people and convince them to do things even against their own will sometimes? And crowd, are you just a natural connector? You've got a quality and high size of network. I think some of these results might be driven by the fact who's in my professional network and what they can consider their source of strength. Oh, could somebody please mute themselves? Thank you. What do you think about the results here? Grasp came to the top of the list here, Sarah.
Yeah, well, I do think there's a reason why Grasp and Scout both pulled so far ahead of the pack. And I think it's something around this concept of resonance, where to resonate, you have to be injecting like something new and novel. Like there's that Scout, like this is a new concept and it has the chance to resonate. What gives it the power to resonate is that mastery of what is currently known. When I think of, someone I got to work up close with who's very influential, Marianne, she's extremely masterful writer and orator. And so a political campaign stump speech is like the perfect environment for her to resonate in. And then she says something in a new way, and that spurs people to take action, donate money, go tell their friends, post memes on the internet, whatever it is. It got people to actually follow through, change the way they were thinking or talking about a certain issue. And we even saw like President Biden ended up taking the title of one of her best-selling books as his campaign slogan, Healing the Soul of America. And, there's photographs of every major candidate reading her book. And it's because she came up with this new idea. She was so masterful at it that it was able to spread and catch fire in that way. And so I think that concept of resonance kind of wraps up, like, I think why Grasp and Scout pulled so far ahead of the pack on that. And I don't know if it's that one is necessarily more important than the other, but that both of them sort of like tap into like what underlies why things resonate.
I love that. I know, and we're gonna break for some questions at the end of all of this toward the end of the hour. So just I saw somebody coming in asking for some questions here. We will get to some of those for sure. It was funny, I did watch a documentary last night on Jordan Peterson, who is a very polarizing person, to say the least, a Canadian professor who talks about a lot of stuff. And you know what, I said to myself, you know what, I've utterly dismissed most of what I've heard without really seeing a lot of his stuff. So I spent about 3 hours on his stuff, and it made me think. I mean, certainly, listening to opposing views or different views is interesting. And one of the things around Grasp is he fully admits his ideas aren't necessarily new. They're psychological kind of, preceding him, but certainly the way he communicates is quite interesting. And he says every time he takes the stage, he never knows where it's all going to end up. And so there's this level of serendipity to some of his lectures and speeches, which is really quite interesting. He probably has a shared ability with Marianne in terms of communication, because I think it's just not about the ideas anymore. It's how those ideas land in your head through communication.
Yeah, just saying something in a new way.
Exactly, right. Sometimes you don't have to split the atom again. You just have to explain how an atom's relevant to you in your life. Love this book, Jeffrey Moore. It was based on some of the work done by Everett Rogers back in the 1950s, some really pioneering work. Think about all of this pre-internet and trying to figure out how messages spread through letter mail, of all things. But this one's kind of being adopted by many of us in software circles and product circles. If you're trying to scale a business, that, if you look at the far left, the 2 standard deviations levels away from the norm, there exists a whole bunch of people on the early part of any kind of market adoption. In Moore's book, he was software focused. He talks about them being enthusiasts and visionaries. And he says one of the biggest challenges businesses have is, how do you climb past this chasm where whatever intrigued these visionaries to your product ahead of time might not be the same reason why the pragmatists and the conservatives and some of the laggards and people that adopt later. And so there's a special talented group of people that can actually help bridge that chasm. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with the model, Sarah, if you buy into it, but any thoughts on this?
I'm not familiar with this model, but I've found that some things that resonate have multiple models that basically say the same thing. And I do a lot of my work in early stage startups, like working on that growth inflection curve of like, someone's got a great idea for this new app or new product, and they've got early adopters. How do you take that to market? And they call that Death Valley with the startup model, is like, you've got a product, it works, you've got your early adopters, but whether you can get that mainstream traction or not will decide whether that company dies or thrives. So I definitely resonate with that concept, and what it takes to cross that chasm there is that change. Like, what inspires the early adopters to use a product is not the same thing that's going to take that product to mass adoption. So there is a shift, a changing of perspective, or how you explicate a value prop, or maybe even which value prop you decide to hone in on. There may be like structural changes that have to happen for something to scale up to that point.
Yeah, and oftentimes entrepreneurs sometimes feel like they're selling themselves out because it's not the same reason why they got into the business in the first place. But if and they may be quite right. Maybe they're not the right people to shepherd that company into the future. But certainly the dynamics that bring a startup to the market and have some reasonable success are not the same dynamics that bring kind of a scaled up company to success either. So I've kind of split this world, at least in this institutionalizing, how do we make influence work for companies and organizations and people, into 4 different spaces here. From, how do we get really intimate and know people, to how do we excite people, and maybe a much broader landscape, or more saccharine sweet kind of stuff. And how do we target people, and how do we get to a broader audience? And so it leads you down a number of different vehicles and directions here, from generating buzz principally through media and social media and other types of things, to, on a really intimate program, it's like, how do you take your 100 best fans, bring them on a trip or bring them to an event, and create some kind of immersive experience that makes them love your brand for life, and everything in between. Do you have your own heuristic or way to navigate the entire world of what influence is, Sarah?
I'm really glad this slide follows the previous one, because that crossing the chasm or getting through that Death Valley, that shift of finding out what value props, what explication of value prop is going to help it scale to the mass market. It's really hard to do that in a silo. You do kind of have to engage key influencers in the market to find out how they would say something, because they're in touch with their audience. They are in there influencing the mainstream and what takes off. So oftentimes they're the ones that come up with the language, and engaging with them at that point is often really crucial, because you might not have that language, but those people who are influential do have that language and can help you come up with it. Also, I love some of these questions coming through. Like, I want to jump in on some of these right now, but we can save them to the end.
Let's try to save them at the end. It's funny, when I have a presentation up, I can't see any of them. So you might be on my eyes and ears to some of these questions going on. So we're really peeling the layers of the onion on influence and influencers here. In my simpleton, I tried to group these into the biggest boxes possible, and maybe I'll either get agreement or let's have a debate here. But if I think about people that have true, authentic influence, they probably have 4 sources of influence, and oftentimes they have an absolute amplitude of one and maybe a shortage of another, but they have reach, right? I know Ryan Reynolds has millions of people that every time he posts something about aviation gen, it's like people are all over that, and it's like millions of people. They've got exposure, right? It's not only their immediate reach, but other people, other media, other personalities, celebrities pay attention for them. They get that multiplier effect. They have credibility. People love honest personalities. I was reading something the other day about why people like Keanu Reeves. And part of it is he's just so humble, and he seems like a nice guy, and he's always like sharing kind of credit with other people. And then for other people, they just have great suasion. There's I sometimes don't readily admit it, but there's a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk, that you may know, Sarah, from all of our online circles. The guy I met at a real live event at a whole bunch of winemakers that thought he was the new guy in wine and was trying to do things in a different way. And they wanted to hate him. Honestly, I talked to a number of them beforehand. I go, what do you think about this guy? And it's like, I came because I was supposed to, or he's the big wine guy, but I really don't believe his stuff. And in about 20 minutes, he had the room eating out of his hand. It was an incredible live experience. Reach, exposure, credibility, and suasion. Have I missed something? Are those the wrong ones, Sarah? Is that where a lot of people derive their cred in terms of influence?
Yeah, I like the, the multiplicative property that's in here, because I think that's really key. You can have one or two of these ingredients and those can feed the other ones. A lot of times reach is constructed on the back of something like credibility and persuasion, or credibility and exposure, and that creates the rest of the equation. So you can start off, a lot of how these people gain influence on social media, become viral, is because they have some unique insight or some unique take on a relevant issue that takes off. And it's not necessarily because they have all of these key it factors going for them. It's just that they had a couple of them and they deployed them, and it netted them the other parts of the equation as well. Or sometimes it's built over time. But I think usually with these types of followings, there's a few inflection points that amass that huge reach, or those amount of social media followers. And it comes down to specific moments where some of those factors multiply to create the others.
I agree. I think, and certainly in my circles, I think if there's one type of person, I oftentimes find people that are really credible. They have done their research and they have done a forensics on something and spent sometimes 2 or 3 years on a subject and kind of boiling the ocean on what that looks like, to the point where there's almost like a curse of knowledge, right? It's like they almost know too much, and they haven't thought about the other aspects of, how am I going to reach people? Who do I need to expose myself to, and how do I persuade them in their language to understand what great argument I've just come up with? So it's truly a concern, certainly with a lot of guild people that think about things really deeply. Sometimes we got to think about the R and the E and the S as well. So I've got two categories of types of influencers. I came up with this maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And similar to that, crossing the chasm, I personally think there's 6 types of influencers, and we always miss the reason why people get involved in something. You and Snap Hustle probably leverage a lot of these people called the message creators, right? They start things. They don't want to be part of any movement once it's mainstream, or even, early adopters. They want to create it. And so they're the vanguard. They end up producing these crazy videos that you've never seen before, or new products. There's the message radar. These are the people sitting right next to the creators that go, I've just spotted that first. This is this crazy thing going on in Japan where people are buying Tamagotchi dolls out of vending machines. You have to get on this trend next. And so there are radar. Then there are the message sellers. These are the people that certainly marketers and brands tend to like to bring into their campaigns. They're just really good salespeople and persuaders through their charm and charisma. Then there are experts. Like, these might be the people that they're not willing to risk their necks out on all this newfangled crazy stuff, but at some point in time early in the game, they go, look, send me your product, I'll test it out, I'll look at it through my own paradigm, and if I bless it, then all of a sudden, it may cross the chasm to somebody else. One level removed from that is the celebrity. This is like the high octane people that once, whether they believe it or not, once they get hold of a product, people magically glom onto them. And then finally, there's a group of grassroots people called social ringleaders, who are just those magical people in your universe that have greater than average networks. And if you ask them, hey, do you know a mechanic? They're likely to come up with like at least 5 names of people that you should talk to in terms of bringing your car to. What do you think about this paradigm here?
I like this. And the first analog, I think, probably because I also come from a strong marketing background, is this is the reason why you can't launch a product or have a go-to-market strategy with just one tactic. getting Ryan Reynolds to make a commercial about your product is not going to do the whole marketing lift. You do have to engage, like, can you validate your value prop with actual statistical data and add credibility? And you have to think of like, well, what news outlets do the people I care about read? Okay, so Ryan Reynolds did a video. Well, we have to like translate that into some press coverage. I mean, there's a lot of dimensions to it. And I think this framework here is really helpful for understanding why you can't just sink all of your marketing budget into one part of it and think that that's going to get your product to market, is you do kind of have to touch all these bases.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I've personally made the mistake before of just treating this early 10% as the same person. And obviously, as we can see here, there's 6 different elements. I'm going to let you speak to this one, because this is more your ball of wax now in terms of Instagram and TikTok and everything that you deal with. You know, the stratification of, there are these nano influencers. I think I've even seen that in your profile, if I'm not mistaken, micro influencers, macro, mega, you know, all-star influencers, fake influencers. Speak to me. What is there a real pecking order here, or at least a different kind of class of influencer?
You know, there's some of them are arbitrary borders that we've put out, like, you know, figures out there where micro influencers are anyone under 50,000 followers, and nano influencers are anyone who has under 10,000 followers. And those are sort of arbitrary, but the more that we are carving up the market this way and really starting to understand influence in terms of like social networks where we can quantify things like reach and engagement, clicks, shares, things like that, we're getting more data, and we're actually starting to break this down into ways that make sense. And one of the key dividing lines that I've seen, probably between the first like 3 that you've got here and then the mega and all stars, nano influencers have the highest engagement rates, like sometimes triple, quadruple what the engagement rates of mega influencers. So if you're constructing an influencer campaign and you're paying for reach, you know, you can pick out any of these arbitrary metrics that you want to, like, you know, spend on these campaigns for. But you know, if Kim Kardashian will get you, you know, a post on her wall is going to get you 10 million reach, you know, that engagement is going to be like 0.3%. It's going to be very small. And so what type of conversion you're looking at is going to be way smaller. So nano influencers, when you're talking more like 5, 10, 15, sometimes 25% engagement, you can have a really sure bet of like your conversion rates going down from there. And so now people are really starting to focus on nano influencers because they're cheaper. You can measure them, you can count on more, you can bank on more. If you just like have someone make a viral TikTok about you, you don't know what kind of conversion you're going to get just because it gets a lot of views. But if you can hone in on, like, if you're selling personalized vitamins, you know, a project I'm working on now, a nano influencer who's known for taking vitamins, maybe they only have 2,000 followers, but the people who follow them specifically because of this very specific expertise. You might only have to pay them $500 for a post, but you could probably get way more conversions than you would if you just had like Kylie Jenner posting about your vitamin, for instance. And so this is more and more where the market is shifting, is because those nano influencers have more credibility that's evidenced by their higher engagement and conversion rates. And they're also more cost effective. You don't have to pay them a crap ton of money just because their personal brand or number of followers. And then when you add into that followers are, they're also an arbitrary metric. Sometimes those mega influencers, they've amassed those followings over sometimes a decades-long career. And people who followed them, you know, 5 years ago may not be engaged with them now. The people who are engaged with them now are engaged on the basis of what that person is doing now. If Kim Kardashian's doing a skincare line, the people engaging with her are currently interested in skincare, but she has a ton of other followers from other things that she's done in her career that maybe aren't relevant to you or aren't, you know, targets for conversion. So I think we also have to keep that in mind, aside from the fact that a lot of these people can just pay for fake followers. So just because they have 50,000 followers, maybe only 15,000 of them are real, and maybe only 5,000 of them are from the last 6 months. And maybe only a small fraction of that are even interested in what you're trying to sell. So you can break it down in a lot of ways, but the more that, you know, we're quantifying influence in this digital landscape where we actually have these things that we can measure, and there's case studies that we can run and compare against other case studies, we are starting to see really clear breakdowns of, you know, the difference between nano influencers and mega influencers, and, you know, quantifiable differences between people who have 50,000 followers and do X type of content on X type of channel versus nano influencers who post this type of content on this other type of channel. So I think it's, you know, we are seeing the stratification. I don't think anything is set in stone yet. I think a lot of things are still arbitrary when we talk about, you know, spend and the economics of influence but we are really starting to arrive at some clear differences, and we kind of know where the market is heading. That's why Snap Hustle, like, I'm totally focused on nano influencers. I don't give a crap about mega influencers. They are spokespeople. This is an old business model. It's the nano influencers that this whole business is existing because of social media. That's where the huge opportunity is. And consequently, we're starting to see that's where all the metrics are starting to stack up. People trust the word of people in their networks over people of who have like huge influence or like are billboards for brands. They're getting higher engagement, higher conversion. I mean, it's all stacking up that way.
This is why I love having you on this webcast today, because you're like me 20 years ago. And the problem I had 20 years ago is, you know, same rule held, right? Nano influencers held court in many neighborhoods or companies or whatever. It was a question of access, right? Pre-social media, particularly
Exactly.
pre-social media. How do you get your hands in a scalable way over these nano influencers? You brought up money. I know people are going to bring up money later on, and the greasy subject of, do you pay these people or can there be some mutualistic relationship? We'll talk about that. Hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit later. I know when you think about the benefits of bringing these people into your world, I did a survey for a group that was focused on you know, creating online communities. And it's interesting, their survey would say, yes, when you think about different things, funding new ideas, yeah, very important. Number 2. Number 4 was delivering awareness and buzz. Number 5 was launching stuff. But if you look at 1 and 3, you know, and I think this is somewhat the bent that you've taken with Snap Hustle, these people can also solve problems for you from a non-traditional source. Certainly they're not in your R&D department. And so they've lived your product. Oftentimes they've lived more with your product than you have yourself in certain circles. And they can give you some insight and some new perspectives on things that you aren't normally there. So a lot of people go for the, how do they become evangelists and preach my word or whatever? And just, it's very transactional. But I think 1 and 3 speak to the fact that they can become kind of almost an extended perimeter to your company, right?
Yeah, and you know, 3 is an interesting one, identifying crowd-based insight and surfacing new perspectives. There's an example recently. I'm working on a project. One of my friends invented this traction spray that you spray it on your shoe soles and it gives you better traction. He invented it to reduce injury while he's playing basketball and increase agility. So you know, we're taking it to market, thinking we're going to market it to college and pro basketball athletes who play on these indoor courts because that's how it was invented. But we've been taking this community-led approach on social media, and we discovered an entirely new segment. We're having slow progress taking off with college and pro basketball, but all of a sudden, this wild segment we never would have thought of, it started catching fire. And it was these remote control crawlers, like people invest thousands of dollars apparently into remote control cars, and then they take them on different terrains. And then they film them driving on different terrains, and they post it on YouTube and other channels and Reddit. And these people are so hungry for traction spray for the tires on their remote control cars that when this product started to hit their communities, it's caught like wildfire. And it's like, it's something that we never in a million years would have thought of because of the way the product came about. But it turns out the community, if they'll find something, that can catch fire a lot quicker than things that you think.
I love it. No, it's a great example, real life example. I know when we look strictly at marketing, I know it's a little bit different than branded content in terms of being able to, one of the big differences between influencers and brand content is just discovering new target customers. I know this pops much higher than doing something along a branded content lines. And then I came up with this a very awkward acronym back in the day called ActiveSP. I'm convinced these are the 8 traits of people that are influential in nearly every business I've ran across, whether it's in B2B or B2C or government or whatever. So I'll go through them, see if they hit with you or not. Early adopters, right? They might not be the pioneers, but they're certainly early in the curve. They're willing to try new things. When somebody says TikTok and they're 55 years old, they go, yeah, game on. I'm kind of curious, right? So that's one thing. They're connected. They're just assiduous in terms of wanting to socialize and get in front of people and learn from them. This one's an interesting one. I find people that travel a lot, see the world out there, maybe take a cosmopolitan approach to life. People that are curious and information hungry and are just craving more in terms of different viewpoints, whether they're consistent with theirs or not. They're not shy about their opinions. They get their voice out there. They're not pushovers, although, they don't have to be kind of the angry person just speaking at the treetops. They're exposed to a wide variety of topics. We have a ton of them in our guild in terms of just being multidisciplinary in focus and being able to fuse all these things together into something new. They have sway over their friends, usually in a social circle. They'll be like the one people point to and go, yeah, I want to go to the party with him, or I need to learn from her, or I'm just buying this new thing and I have no idea. I need to talk to her. And so a whole bunch of things around that. And then most importantly, and this was Gladwell's advice to me when he sent me his message back on his book, is like, look, I don't know about any of this, but he said, look, they have to have a passion for the category or product. And so case in point, I ran my business for a year thinking, yeah, they're, if they have a big network and they have all these other attributes, they probably don't need to necessarily know a lot about your category. Wrong. And so, I'm great at jogging. Give me a pair of running shoes. I can probably give you a very astute opinion on it. Ask me what car I drive and all the geeky stuff that all the gearheads love. Totally uncredible. I'll admit to the world, I am not great at that stuff. So these were my shorthand attributes of anybody that has any influence in any industry probably has a fair amount of some of this stuff working for them. You buy, Sarah?
Yeah, and honestly, I have this framework as a point in the column for nano influencers, because when it comes to passion for a very specific category or product, if it's like remote control cars, those people are not going to have 1 million followers. I'm sorry. It's just not that big of a market. And so when you're looking for very specific, people who really truly have influence, sometimes they're going to have smaller audiences, but you're going to get an insane return on your investment out of that small audience. And that can get you from those early adopters to that mainstream distribution or finding and riding that wave. So I think that these are absolutely crucial ingredients that ultimately drive the metrics behind influencer campaigns. It's not just, we want to try and maximize reach and engagement. Is you have to look at these qualitative things as well to figure out, is this an influential partnership? Is this person actually an influencer in the way that we need, that we're looking for? They could be, Kim Kardashian could be an influencer when it comes to skincare, but, she's just launched a home accessories line, something she's not totally known for yet. Well, she may be successful, but every day people are shifting around their digital personas. They're getting new interests, and back to this nature of the fleeting nature of influence, where just because someone gets a bunch of followers at one moment for one piece of content or one current event that they had a take around doesn't mean that carries through for the rest of their career. There is sort of like a viral nature where it pops. You get a bunch of engagement and following, and then it tapers off for a bit, and then maybe you get another bump. And I think successful people who are really influential can manage multiple peaks like that. But we got to be really careful when we're talking about influences. Is it something that's sustained? Is it really relevant for this specific category or not? It might not be. Someone could be very influential when it comes to D2C marketing, but then when you try and talk to them about user-generated content, you got some misses, or it doesn't resonate quite the way it does when they're specifically talking about D2C, for instance.
We got so much good stuff. We should do a master class on all of this, right? Are we going to do that? We should do this, because I know we're probably not going to get to the end of this. We could populate 8 hours of the course on this, I am sure. So we'll probably go about 10 more minutes. We'll do some housekeeping at the end. We'll open it up for the questions that I'm sure have been asked in the chat. Where is this happening online? I think this is even maybe a slightly outdated information, because my sense is TikTok has kind of risen the ladder, at least in online terms. And there is a little bit of a caveat here that, as much as a lot of the stuff starts online or is visible online, word of mouth's happening every day, right? It's happening on my street. It's happening as I have dinner with other people. It's happening when I play poker tonight, as I will with other people. And I'll probably talk about what we talked about today. And so, there is something to be said around, look, there's online and offline influence. But in terms of online, it looks like Instagram rules the day. Is this consistent with your world?
I think so. I think there's probably going to be some variation with sector and things like that. B2B is probably still focusing on YouTube and things like that. They're probably more on Instagram than they are on TikTok still. And I do see these things as being really in flux. I think there's also a lot of experimentation. Brands may try to launch on TikTok, do a campaign, and then next quarter they're going to shift to Instagram. There's a lot of experimentation, especially since last year with the iOS 14 privacy changes. Ad budgets are shifting around, and I don't know if I wouldn't say it's, necessarily because one platform conveys any more advantage than the other, but I think it's sector specific, and there's an element of experimentation where you're just not getting the same return that you used to with dumping ad money into Facebook. It's just not the same, and so you're going to shift to Pinterest, you're going to try Snapchat, you're going to be trying new things right now. So I would expect, the proportions will probably stay about this same. I think TikTok is definitely on a growth curve, and that's one to watch out for. YouTube is trying to make a lot of strides as well with capitalizing on influencer marketing. But I think part of this is Instagram has rolled out the most features to support collaboration and commerce on the platform. They may be rolling some of those back in the near future, but they have for sure been the most experimental with these types of features and business models. So I'm not surprised to see any of this, but I guess my caveat would be, I wouldn't take this breakdown too seriously. I think it's going to vary a lot depending on what type of business or project you're running, and where ad spend goes for political campaigns in the next election season. I have no idea. It'll be pretty interesting. I doubt it's going to be the same as in 2020. I'll say that.
Well, and certainly we've got a lot of business people that come into the guild. I know 3 things that aren't on this list that I always consider. LinkedIn is probably still one of the most undervalued network for B2B and professional kind of engagement. It's where I lean a lot to. I must say, over the last 2 or 3 years, I've hated where some of the posts go to. It's almost become Facebook light in some respects, and it's starting to, people go, oh, I'm personal and I should be able to share my point of view. But when it's, once every so often, fine. But when it's every day a crisis happened and I've got some personal sentiment, I go, look, the value of professional, credible things I can take away are done. So there, I've got my statement on LinkedIn, but still very important. Medium, I find some of the smartest people on any subjects that we deal in the guild have got their start writing on Medium. And I think Substack is increasingly now a paid newsletter world of people that, if you have a really good Substack, I know that you've probably got a lot of horsepower behind your mind and are able to get stuff out on a regular basis that make a lot of sense to a lot of people. Couple last things we'll cover off here, and then what I want to cover off is I've got a list of personal influence. So I've got a list of 11 things. I haven't shared it with you yet. You'll tell me if you've got other things on your list. Sound good, Sarah?
Yeah.
So on this one, I guess I'll go through this as a last one. We'll fast forward to that other slide. When people naturally spread word of mouth, we did a survey maybe 4 or 5 years ago on this. I don't think it's probably radically changed. Personal identification, this is your Kardashian effect, right? I like them. I believe I'm like them. So therefore, I will buy whatever things Kylie Jenner's hawking. It's innovative. It's exciting. It actually solves something in my life. I remember one year we did a poll on what is the most word-of-mouthable product in Canada, and it was Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, right? Oh my God, I get stuff off walls. This is like something I've hated for the rest of my life. It makes it easy to talk about. Certainly, Apple does a really good job of this in terms of just their branding and just making it easy to talk about both their ads, their products, what have you, their packaging. It's new, it's newsworthy, it's exclusive. You can only get it here. There's a lineup. That's why we love nightclubs with lineups and don't like clubs that don't have lineups. And then it's fashionable. It's somehow time dependent, and it's just hit the right context at the right time. Good list, bad list?
I think it's a great list. I think something with which you personally associate has a lot of layers to it, especially when we talk about like viral news items that happen. Someone is much more likely to share news about Hurricane Ian if they know people in its path, if it's something that personally affects them, or they're more likely to spread gossip about Adam Levine's DMs with people if they have been personally affected by, cheating or something like that. So I think there's that element to virality, is if it's just something that people relate to, they're going to share that content over something they don't relate to any day of the week.
Oh my God, we've mentioned Kardashians and Adam Levine in the same call together here. It's like we've tripped into the mud here. So
nowhere else. You can only get this here at the Grey Swan Guild.
Oh man, that's a really good pivot to a selling item here. I have so much other good stuff we could have talked about. I'm going to bring you back for more, and maybe we will do a masterclass or something. I just think I love the cadence back and forth. Lululemon and Dream Salesforce are two of my faves on this front. I thought we'd just go through this list quickly. Do you have since I got my two in, do you have two brands that you go, wow, those people do it really well?
Oh gosh, I could think of a ton, but we can keep it moving. I'm sure I'll bring them up if it's relevant.
Well, I think part of the crew that will listen to this will go, that's great. It's like an esoteric, practical kind of exploration of the subject, but I'm looking at my own influence, right? How do I become more influential in my own world, whether it's personal or professional? I've wrote down a list of 11 that is somewhat based on some of the principles that were found in our deck and just kind of reside in my brain, and some of which are really consciously 2022, 2023, what Sean Moffat is focusing on. You'll be my audit here, and see if this list makes sense. So it's like Spinal Tap. We don't do top 10 lists. We do top 11 lists because, of course, everybody does top 10 lists. We can go to 11 here, right? So number 11, consistency and content, just striving for regular activity and content being out there. And it's something that the novelty factor on my life gets the better of me. And I go, look, I'm going to do this on a weekly or monthly basis. And sometimes I get in trouble on this one, but just getting consistency of stuff out there is big in terms of being influential. Two, I give back. I just, there's a psychological phenomenon called the Benjamin Franklin effect, where you actually ask for favors in return for some of that stuff that you've done. So it's almost like a bank account that you've done, but whether it's paying it forward. I know I was just part of a social innovation program where we had young entrepreneurs, and I donated a ton of my time to actually make sure that they were doing kind of entrepreneurship the right way. And so, this is a world of reciprocity. It's not you all the time. Smile, have fun. It's proven that if you're more likable, people will find you influential. It's proven on even photos on your LinkedIn posts, like, dead to rights, you should probably smile because people actually get more favorable reactions from just smiling. You've got a great smile, Sarah. I'm sure you've advocated this for yourself as well. Lists, people know me. People sometimes hate lists. I don't care. I know they work. I know people love things in chunkable units, and I love, a lot of times people get into the nuance of what should be number 6 versus number 4. I do this thing called the top 30 new technologies every year, and you would not imagine how many geeks in my world debate whether biotech or something AI is going to actually jump the shark. And then finally, on this first list, emotions and passions, just real reactions, real inspirations, real stories. I think sometimes these can be manipulative, but when they're real, they can certainly create some influence. Any thoughts on top of this list before I go through 4 through 6?
Yeah, this might be a little spicy, but I would push back on consistency. I know that's something that's preached a lot, and I think that's because people are really trying to make businesses out of personal brands or influencer careers. But if you actually study how PR, how influence has been done historically, and you look at the data of how it physically happens today, it actually happens with bursts and inflection points. Celebrity was built on like one movie launch, and then another movie launch, and then a brand sponsorship partnership or something. It was like clear, like these are specific moments that created this type of celebrity, that created the following, the engagement, the reputation. The actual influence was carved out over just a few big inflection points. And that's still how it happens today, except we can quantify it more accurately with social media. You'll get a ton of followers because you posted one timely, relevant thing that resonated. And that's how you get it. And then later on, next week, maybe you have another relevant thing. Maybe it's in 2 months, you have another good piece of content that's timely and relevant that resonates. And that's where you're going to get the bulk of your growth from. So I always like to push back on that whole consistency. Oh, you got to post 3 times a week. It's better to say something very good at the right time in the right place than it is to just keep posting day after day and think that people are going to pay more attention. It actually creates an effect of like the boy who cried wolf when these influencers are posting a ton of content, people are actually their engagement rates go down. We see this, it's actual quantifiable data at this point that the engagement rates go down. So what you're looking for is like, can you be in the right place at the right time? Which is actually, it's always been the ingredient of celebrity. That actually hasn't changed.
Fair enough. I like that pushback. I think it's a good one, particularly in places where some people don't have a lot of range to what they're talking about, right? So it's tough to make, personal drama, relevant every day of the week, I suppose. So,
well, that's a good point for consistency is, are you talking about, if I talk about neuroscience, that's great. But the second I go off and talk about something else, then I lose that consistency.
Well, yeah. I mean, I that's where I go off the gravel road, because I like the range that we have in our guild. I like to explore different subjects. We've now done 48 of these. Not one of them is the same, and not one of them uniquely appeals to all, like everybody. So it's I think by specializing and creating kind of people that are just one-trick ponies, like we lose the benefit of people that can make connections and create that kind of polymathic combinations with things. My 6 through 4 list here, just listening and emotional intelligence, like listening to other people and having a unique take on something that you've learned from them. And then particularly when you combine it with your own stuff can be really, really powerful. I find kind of when I look at somebody in a completely different space that has done something really well, I go, wow, I wouldn't do it in their space, but I would take that exact concept and import it into my own space is really powerful. For myself personally, the medium is the message. I'll borrow a Marshall McLuhan line here. In long form, whether it's medium or whatever, I just find those are great for deep explorations. For podcasts, I find people can do things as they're distracted. For video, it's great for dramatizing things. And for interactive type of things, which I'm increasingly looking at in terms of apps and different things of my business, it's a great way to personalize mediums of value. And the other thing I've learned about mediums is you got to be one of the first on the platform. It's really tough when you get in late in the game to actually build an audience up. People will argue differently, but I've never been first on a platform, but I've been an early pioneer on some of them, and there's a real distinct advantage. And then finally, connect with the tops in your game. Influence does attract influence, and so not doing it in a specious way or not in a way that couldn't produce outcomes for both parties, but just we've recently done a project on biomimicry, and we've friended probably top 70 people in the space. And it's been really interesting, both in terms of insight and also being able to know that they're part of now our future report. So any thoughts on this list, Sarah?
I think that connecting with the tops in your game, that's probably an underrated thing I don't think a lot of people think about with the whole like metaverse and marketing and stuff like that. I saw that really quick in metaverse marketing. There was a small handful of people that sprung up to like want to talk about this specifically, and they were really early. And they banded together for the most part, and they shared messaging. And now metaverse marketing is so huge, and just like the past year, it's come so far. And I think that that's part of it is people who maybe are in a very small niche field that doesn't mean that field isn't going to grow or expand rapidly, that there's not a trend happening. And a lot of times that trend is powered by exactly that, people who have maybe smaller amounts of influence connecting, and then everybody's influence grows.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And finally, my list of 3, the last 3, I think they're kind of ranked. I put these much higher on the list. I think just having sometimes of social proof, like if somebody doesn't know you, they're looking for tangible signs that what you're talking about is really good. And so whether it's numbers or whether it's you've written a book or something tangible, or you've created a landscape and it's just there's a visual representation of the great work that you've done, you've got some designation, a testimonial, you've taken some training. Certainly it's going to be different for different people in different industries, but having some sense of, yeah, you know what? I should be going to that restaurant because other people that I know are going to that restaurant, or they've had the 2022 Now Magazine Award of the Year for being the best restaurant in town. I think that has a lot of benefit in terms of influence. Substance, I know for me, there are some virtuosos in a lot of different spaces. I won't make apologies. I work hard and I strive to be the best at some of the stuff that I do. And so trying to be the most informed and credible on a subject is, at least for me, what works in terms of influence. I know if I'm tackling a subject like this one today, I know I've explored probably 10 times as much what you show on slides in terms of what we could have tackled as a subject. So that's just my MO. There's other MOs that are different for people. And then finally, authenticity, just being real, being honest, having integrity. It's really tough to be influential and carry a lot of weight if you're not being true to yourself. I've heard about all these Instagrammers, Sarah, that burn out because they're having a too challenging a time trying to live somebody else's life and kind of travel around the world and do these crazy things. So I know. So those are my top three: authenticity, substance, and social proof. You liking what I'm dishing?
I love this slide because I think, without authenticity, you can't produce work of substance. And if you don't produce work of substance, you're not going to get that real social proof. So I think that these three really build on top of each other. And in terms of like influence, there's a great example of this girl is Isabel, who is like I_so_dope. And she's an influencer for nuclear energy. This is the world of 2022, nuclear energy influencers. And, she's just genuinely inspired about nuclear energy and wanted to take it out of the realm of like scientific nerds and into the mainstream to change the meme of nuclear power is bad into a meme of nuclear power is good. And so she makes these TikToks that have tons of like validating data points and research. And, she's sort of like Gary Vee, like very humble. She's like, I'm just a humble influencer. What do I know? But sounds like this is better than fossil fuels. Like she's sort of has that vibe, that suasion. And then, she has the social proof of the work that she does ends up getting covered in the news magazines. And that's sort of like the core recipe of how you become an influencer. Is you have to like genuinely care about something like nuclear energy to then produce content of substance that then persuades people to write about you and spread the word about you or follow you on TikTok, even if it's as basic as that. So I think these three are like these number 1, 2, and 3 for sure. I agree with this hierarchy, all that to say.
Well, no, you know what? We're going to exchange our hierarchies at some point in time. I know you've probably got a different list of 11, so I'd love to just do the collision of both of those and see where we land. Tell you what, I'm going to ask you a favor. I'm going to do the Benjamin Franklin effect here. Could I ask a favor, Sarah? Could you look through our chat and look through some of the questions? I'm going to do 2 minutes of just housekeeping for the guild, and then we'll pivot to asking or answering some of the questions that have been brought up here. So I'm going to take 2 minutes and just tell people what's going on with things in the guild, and we're going to post all of these slides onto Medium, which will be linked to our website as well. So we don't want to deprive people of what's going on. In terms of stuff in the guild, we've got 3 different ventures going on. We are going to get something called a weather vane out on our post-pandemica this weekend. And so for those people in the guild, look forward to that. We're trying to put an exclamation mark on what is the lasting legacy of the pandemic as we kind of exit and kind of all go back to some kind of hybrid work environment that looks like it may be stable. I know we've had great chats this week of a playbook of 30 to 40 authors that are going to come together and produce a book that makes sense of the world. I think the working title might be Uncertainty, which I love as a title, and nobody else has it, so please don't steal it. We've mentioned it first here. And we're going to be asking for submissions of guild members in terms of what their thoughts are in terms of kind of a 300-word summary. So Sarah, my hope is we'll get you involved in that as well. And plus we'll end up doing some master classes, which I brought up already. It seems to be a pertinent topic this week. And we're actually going to do on October 12th, making of courses. We're going to talk to 3 of our guild members that have done training courses, and we're going to learn from both their benefits and mistakes in terms of stuff. Myself and Sarah are part of this great crew called Cygnus Sprints. We have started up our own consultancy and advisory group within the guild. There's 52 of us. Here's some of all of our faces staring back. They are amazing people. And if you are a brand or a business or a company that is looking for help and wants that help done in 13 weeks or less, we think we're the best kind of choice in town. Featured cities in the month. We just had this great discussion with about 20 people from Amsterdam. It was wonderful. Great discussion, and I love the Dutch level of directness. Like, people were just very direct about what is this guild thing all about, which is true Dutch. We're going to do Sao Paulo next month in Brazil, and so hopefully get a real Portuguese and Brazilian bent to our guild. This is happening October 20th. Sarah, I think you're going to be moderating one of these sessions. I think I'm just choreographing the day. 11 hours of coverage of both smart authors and smart books. Please join us. It starts at 8 a.m. October 20th. And then our next 2 craft building series, we'll have a set of 50 by the end of, or by mid-October. We're going to do one on Clubhouse on jokes, humor and memes, which I hear you know something about memes, Sarah. So you'll
Oh,
tell
I'll
me
be there.
You will totally be there. And then finally, we'll do a LinkedIn Live 2 weeks from now on judging, anchors, and acceptance, and how we go about judging people and things with some of our heuristics and biases. I'm going to stop there. I don't know if you've had a chance to go through any of the questions and just get to some of the more juicy ones, Sarah, but any questions sparked your fancy?
Yeah, it looks like what got a lot of people worked up in the chat here was the talk about TikTok and its rise to dominance in various aspects. It sounds like people want us to talk about the geopolitical risks or implications of TikTok, which happens to be one of my favorite topics in the world to talk about. So very excited.
Well, serve it up. What's your manifesto here?
Yeah. Well, judging by some of the comments, I would start off by saying, yes, I do think TikTok poses a very serious geopolitical risk. And someone brought up that some of this has been well documented. We know things, for instance, like the feed algorithm in China is different than it is here. Not only do they have like limits on the time that they can spend on TikTok, whereas here it's uncapped, like teenagers can spend infinite amount of time on TikTok, but also the algorithms there are geared to show younger people and teens educational content, which, as I've said, does exist. There's doctors, there's people producing very, dense intellectual material and conveying like a lot of knowledge in a short form of time. Like TikTok as a medium is incredibly powerful. You can learn so much more in one TikTok than you could reading an hour of textbooks. So that's the content that's being shown to Chinese youth. The content that's being shown to us, the bottom line is we don't have control over that. And we see the effects that are happening now, whether you're cooking chicken with NyQuil or, putting mysterious ingredients in things and then eating it for like a trend, or like eating Tide Pods. Like there's all these crazy things that we keep seeing happening on TikTok. And we know that that's happening here and it's not happening in China, aside from the just straight up data implications of, only one person who has TikTok on their phone compromises all the devices on your Wi-Fi network. I mean, it is pretty intense. So I guess we can start from that baseline of like, there absolutely is a very serious geopolitical risk that I see. And then someone even said, is the TikTok killer app being invented? Has the TikTok killer app started out there yet? What's next? I really built Snap Hustle for this purpose. My dad does national security. And so I've always been very conscious, ex-military family, very conscious of our national security. And so social media, at first I saw it as a domestic national security risk because of the polarizing nature of content, that it drives our communities apart based off of inflammatory content that gets syndicated across a huge population in a short amount of time. And then the most inflammatory content is what gets shown. And this affects our personal relationships because this is where we're all connecting with each other. This is where our community is. And so it, started off as a domestic national security risk that we really have to be more self-aware of social media and handle it a little bit more responsibly, not just for our sake, but for our kids' sake. And then TikTok has really brought the game to the geopolitical level, I think, where it is still about us and our kids and our domestic national security, but we're also talking on a world stage at this point, especially as the adoption curve continues the way it has been. I think there's a concept for those of you interested called American dynamism. This is somewhat new. It's a thesis that Andreessen Horowitz is investing on. They have a whole fund dedicated to making United States businesses competitive on the global scale. I think social media is definitely one of those sectors where we have to put up a competing product to TikTok or there will be serious geopolitical implications. And I don't think Meta is cutting it right now. I don't think any of the current companies are stepping up to the plate. So with Snap Hustle, I'm piloting a new revenue model for a new type of social media platform. This is my goal, is to build this type of platform. So if you're interested to talk more, definitely please connect with me. It's literally my favorite thing to talk about. I see Basir has his hand up. I would love to continue this discussion.
We'll tell you what, we'll, for the sake of our recorded audience, we'll close this one out. We'll continue the discussion for those that want to kind of engage in kind of like a one-on-one or one to a few discussion. But By way of closing, I want to thank Sarah for joining me today. Just an amazing tennis match partner in terms of this topic. I was sincere. We should really think about doing some type of class or something together here. Some really good insights. We're going to open this up to the live audience shortly, but I'm going to go off the recording now. And for those, we will see you in the future. Next week, we'll be talking about jokes and humor and memes, and hopefully we'll see you at other parts of the guild. Thanks very much.